Hey, welcome to Joyable's 7th episode of Minds at Work. My name is Olivia and I will be your host. Today we are welcoming Robert and we are going to talk about storytelling and businesses. Hi Robert, thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me.
How are you?
I'm doing quite well. It's becoming a little hot outside, but I like the summer.
So could you tell us a bit about yourself first?
Absolutely. I am the senior consultant at Knowmium. We specialize in presentation training, influence, and negotiation, and a lot of different types of persuasive communication training. We work with financial groups, insurance, reinsurance, banks, government, and retail all throughout Asia.
Great. Okay. So to start with, what exactly is business storytelling?
Well, business storytelling is actually exactly what it sounds like. It's using stories in business. But where we do that has a lot of variety. So, for example, we think about giving a presentation, and we can add a story to that to make it more entertaining, to make it more memorable, and hopefully to make the audience like us more. But we can also use storytelling in our one-on-one conversations, in just internal business meetings and briefings. Anytime we have a message, if we have a place a story might help convey that message or help us be more memorable, it's always a good idea to add some kind of storytelling.
Of course, yeah. It's more engaging.
Absolutely.
So what are the benefits of using storytelling in businesses?
Well, the benefits come from being human. And humans, since our basic evolution into what we are today, we've used storytelling around campfires. Before we had written language, we were telling stories to pass along our histories, our morals, and we, as humans today, still love stories. We watch TV, we watch movies. We still sometimes build campfires, depending on where we're living in the world. But we still go to parties and we go to dinners and we tell stories when we're with our friends and having a good time. So it's something that we naturally like. In terms of the business world, I mentioned that storytelling can make us memorable. And the reason is that humans don't remember dry facts and statistics very well. If, for example, if we have a list of 10 facts or statistics and we tell an audience that, the next day, most people won't remember a single one. Right. But if we tell a story while we're giving those facts and statistics, the audience can remember that story and they can remember what that story meant, what that moral was. So they can remember those takeaways much more easier. So they may not remember the numbers, but they'll remember the point of those numbers.
Right.
So it's always a great idea to use a story, especially in business, if we are trying to get our point across persuasively or make it memorable. One of a guy from Harvard, Edward O. Wilson, he said, narrative and storytelling is the human way of working through a chaotic and unforgiving world. So when we are presented with a new idea or we're in a new situation, we think back to the stories that we've heard throughout our lives, and we sometimes put ourselves into that story mode. How would the hero of that story navigate the situation? Maybe that gives me a path to navigate it myself.
I see. That's really interesting. And so there's a famous quote that says, facts speak to your mind, stories speak to the heart. What do you think of? Well, that's actually what you just said, right? But what do you think?
Well, I agree for a couple of reasons. First of all, when we talk about speaking to the heart, we can go back and we think about the three persuasive proofs that Aristotle had. He said to persuade somebody, we needed logic, and our ideas have to make sense. We need credibility. The person has to trust us, and they have to trust our ideas. But we also need emotion. We have to make them care. And even though that's this very old idea from Aristotle, it's still very true, because I can tell you that, let's say there's a country far away and children are starving, and if we donated money, it would help them. You could say, yes, I believe you, and yes, I do believe that contributing money would logically help them have food, but I just don't care. And no one's ever going to donate any money to that cause if we don't touch them personally in their heart.
Of course.
So there's that old idea, but it's funny that you say that that facts speak to the mind and stories speak to the heart. It is about emotion, but stories actually speak to the mind as well, because with facts, it's and statistics and numbers, it speaks to different parts of our brains. And when we tell stories and we have these different senses within the story, with our sight, with the way sounds worked in the story, even taste, smell, touch and feel are the same thing. But it opens up and uses different parts of our brain.
Right.
And that goes back into how do we create memories. Because we are using different parts of our brain, and if stories activate them, it does make us more memorable.
Right, and so through stories, you use your imagination a lot more, right? Because you visualize it in a way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You visualize it, and at the same time, when we hear that story and we visualize it immediately, it makes it entertaining to listen to.
Of course.
And then those images, they can sometimes stay with us. It's almost like using a PowerPoint or visuals. If it's done right and done correctly, PowerPoint can be a very effective tool to add those visuals, to add that image that hopefully people will remember.
Yeah.
Just a word on PowerPoint, it can definitely hurt though. So I'm not giving saying it's always use PowerPoint when you're giving a speech. Actually, PowerPoint can hurt the speech itself and the speaker if it's not done correctly. But if we use, for example, a lot of images, a lot of clear pictures that go along with our basic ideas, those can create some very good visuals.
I see, yeah, because PowerPoint can get really dull, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know that's a completely different topic, but since I brought it up, I'm like, I have to give this disclaimer. Like, just because you have PowerPoint, if there's a bunch of bullets and words on the screen, that doesn't mean it's a good idea.
That doesn't mean it's more engaging.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are the biggest misconceptions of storytelling?
I'm glad you asked that. Sometimes when we run storytelling workshops, or when we have a storytelling element with our presentation workshops, every once in a while we'll have some pushback. And somebody says, well, my boss doesn't want to hear stories. He only wants the numbers. And we say, okay, that's fair. If it's Monday morning and let's say we have a sales report and my manager says, how many sales did you make last week? Give me your numbers. He doesn't need me to tell him this story. He wants the raw data.
Right.
But that's very informative. That's just very fact-based reporting. If we are dealing with an audience and we have time and we do have some kind of persuasive message, we want them to think differently, we want them to act differently or take some kind of action after our presentation, adding in the story again is a great way to motivate people. So, but every once in a while we say, oh, it doesn't really have a place in business because business is about numbers. It's about the bottom line. But what we have to remember is if we're dealing with internal stakeholders, people within our company, or external stakeholders, clients that might purchase some goods or services from our company, it is about the bottom line in business on paper. But to get to that point, we have to motivate them. We have to inspire them to do business with us. And if they like us, if they like our product, if they like our delivery, we have a better chance of signing a contract with them than we would just, here's our number, call us if you want us. It's very impersonal. And in global business today, there's so many different outlets who we can do business with. And it often comes back to doing business with people that you like and that make it easy. And going back into storytelling, that's one way to make people like us.
Okay, great. And I guess you can implement facts into stories, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We're not suggesting that you just go and tell an inspirational story that has no data in it. We can couple those together. We can give a narrative, and as we walk through those different plot points, we can talk about statistics. We can add those facts, and instead of just listing them one by one. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have an example of storytelling that has gone bad?
I do, actually, and I hope it's okay. I'm going to use something not from business. I guess it's related to business. I'll use something from American politics.
Yeah, no problem.
In the last election, when it was Trump versus Clinton, and Trump was doing a town hall meeting. He was doing an interview, and the reporter asked, how can you relate to just common voters? How can you relate to the average citizen when you have all this, money and wealth? And he said, well, I'm a self-made man. And When I was young, my father gave me a small loan of $1 million. And I took that $1 million and he went in to talk about investing and he went to continue this short story. And the interviewer actually called him out and said, how do you think you're relating to the average American if you're talking about a small loan of $1 million? For the average American, they're never going to see that. They can't get a loan of $1 million. So I think that's one way. The story that Trump told did not connect with his target audience. So we can say that story missed the point. It did fail.
Oh, yeah.
And I think another way stories can fail is when we get into not reaching our target audience because the story doesn't fit the value that we're trying to promote.
Okay.
So if I say if I manage a team and I want them to feel very inspired about the next 3 months and where the company is going, I need a story that speaks to looking ahead and persevering and with that payoff at the end. And if I tell a completely different story that misses that point, or if the point is not clear, it's misinterpreted.
Yeah, and then it gets confusing. And
absolutely.
Right. Mm-hmm. It's funny that you spoke about Trump, because I mean, whatever he says is bad anyway, right?
Yeah, most of it, you know. Yeah. And I think, though, on the positive side, it will be for generations a story. It'll be this time we go back and we look in the history books and we look at these news clips and we say, what in the world happened?
The funny story of Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Maybe there is a silver lining to it all.
Let's hope so. So do you use storytelling?
I do. I use it just socially because I'm a human. I find myself telling stories when I'm in social settings. But when we think about business, I've tried to take the research that says put in stories, even 30-second or 1-minute stories. I've tried to use that myself when I do training with other people. So I like to give example stories. If we're teaching a course, for example, about persuasion and influence, I'd like to tell some stories where other people have been successful. And I have to remember and guide myself to tell those stories. It's almost like a checklist when I'm planning a training program. Does this section of the training have at least one story that audience can relate to?
Right.
And if it doesn't, I need to put it in, or sometimes even create one.
So every time you force yourself to find at least one story.
If we have a major point in a training program, and there is a business story, whether it's mine, whether I found it in the news, or like I said, maybe we have to create that story. And I think that's the beauty of storytelling, because we have a lifetime of experience we can use, and it's already in our head. So we don't have to do a lot of research if we can find those stories and figure out how to apply them with those values that we're trying to teach. But just reading the news and keeping up with current events, there's stories happening all around us.
Yep.
And at the same time, if we need to, we could invent the story.
Exactly.
I can say my friend Jason is a salesman, and here's what happened to Jason, and none of it's true, but it's not a lie either. It's a creative narrative. It's not meant to fool anybody. It's there to emphasize and illustrate a point.
And you're just using your imagination, so it's genuine.
Absolutely.
So last but not least, any tips you would like to share for new startups or small brands that would be in need?
Yeah, I do have a couple. And if possible, what I'd like to do is tell a very short story that would drive home some of these ideas that we're using. There's a book called Made to Stick. It's by two brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. And Chip Heath was teaching at the Harvard Graduate School of Business. And what he did is every semester he went into one of his classes and said, okay, students, half of you are going to give a 1-minute speech today about why nonviolent crime is serious. And the other half of the class, you're going to give a 1-minute speech on why nonviolent crime is not serious. So these are Harvard graduate business students. They're really smart. They can give speeches. They have a few minutes to plan. They get up and they each give their 1-minute speech. Chip Heath says, good work. I need to go prepare for the rest of the lesson. He puts on comedy for 10 minutes. And the students just relax. He comes back 10 minutes later and says, surprise, you now have a quiz. Write down everything you can remember about the speeches that you just heard 10 minutes ago. And what he found semester after semester, most students can't remember one or two ideas. The information's gone. only 5% of them can remember one statistic that was used.
Wow.
The problem is that 90% of the students are using statistics. And the 63% of the students 63% of the students can remember stories that were used. Now, 63 is not perfect, but it's better than 5.
Of course.
But only 10% of the students are using stories to get their point across. So we have to take a look at these numbers, and that's just one situation. We could go and look at how other audiences do or don't remember stories and statistics. But the big takeaway is we overuse statistics when we're trying to be persuasive, but it's simply not memorable. We can continue using those statistics, but we do need to couple them with some stories and some narratives that are more memorable.
Okay.
So that's kind of my story. And just as a final point, just some quick tips. Plan personal stories. Like I said, I have to put them in my training. If anybody has a speech or a meeting that they're going to, plan it out. Just like you would any other presentation. Put in a 1 to 2 minute story if you have time. Find business stories, make a catalog. When you read something that is interesting to you that happened in the world of business or politics or whatever, write it down, save the link, and you can go back to those links and you can have these go-to stories that you can immediately, once you see the title, you'll almost remember all the details of that story. And just get used to them. Have fun doing them, practice them, friends and family. Tell some stories over the dinner table, and you'll find yourself doing it much more often in the regular business world.
Okay, thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you, Olivia.
Stay tuned for the next episode.